to take control of the situation, tells us that they do arrest on a regular basis what they call infiltrators. Basically, they mean people who are getting orders from Tripoli. They say people who are trying to cause some kind of chaos here or ignite some sort of violent confrontation. So it is certainly a very volatile stability, and people here are making sure, are very aware of that. Wherever you go, you find youth committees on the streets trying to see who is coming in and out of the towns, trying to control the roads. I think they have a very sophisticated way of talking to each other or sending messages to each other, despite the fact that the mobile network is very, very poor at the moment. The internet is really not working. So they are making really a sort of, I would say, community effort to try to keep the cities and towns of eastern Libya safe.
How much coordination is there between Baida and the other towns in that region? And what do they think in terms of the rest of the country? Are they still just focusing on local events, or is there a sense that they need to now move out to try and take Tripoli?
Well, they're very much focusing on the rest of the country. There is a feeling here in the east that since Gaddafi came to power in 1969, there was a deliberate policy of economic outing of the east, trying to keep the eastern tribes at bay, or trying to impose on them some sort of hardship in their lives. Now, and that was in favor of the western tribe. So they have been closely looking at what has been happening in the west. The revolts, obviously, in the west has given momentum to the people of the east. And I have heard many people also over the last 24 hours or so making calls, tribal leaders saying that if the situation in Tripoli remains difficult, then they will send their men to go and help the people in Tripoli and the surroundings, maybe also to try and go and liberate Sirte, which is really the hometown of Gaddafi. There is an insistence here in the east that despite this policy that Gaddafi had, as they view it, of trying to separate the east from the west, they want to make sure that the country remains united. At least that's what they say, and Tripoli remains the capital of a united Libya.
And that's essentially it, isn't it? Because given the division between east and west, one has to be, I guess, a little bit cautious that perhaps there may arise the possibility of suggestions that there may be, if not a secessionist movement, then certainly a focus by the eastern people on their own particular circumstance rather than a national circumstance.
Absolutely. They do have a feeling here that they have been disadvantaged for about 40 years. One man told me, we have oil, we're the 9th richest country, we're the first African country in oil, but we are extremely poor. We don't have a future in this country, especially in the east. They feel extremely disadvantaged, but I think they do realize that them alone would make a lot of problems and would certainly ignite tribal conflicts, and that is one thing they want to avoid. They say that that would be really the outcome of 40 years of governance that really was meant to divide and rule. Now, people here do feel strong because they have most of the army on their side. Most of the commanders have switched sides. Since I've been here, I've seen in a town after another commanders coming up, reading statements saying that they're now on the side of the people. And these commanders work as a link with the West. They are the ones who figure out, who speak to other commanders in the West, trying to figure out what's the situation, trying to figure out which towns are falling into the hands of the opposition and which towns are still in the middle of the strife.
All right. Hoda Abdelhamid in Al Baida. Thank you, Hoda. Well, the UN Security Council has released a draft resolution calling for further action following the violence in Libya. During a meeting late on Friday, Libya's UN ambassador also turned around to denounce Gaddafi. Just 3 days earlier, he had supported Gaddafi. Mohamed Shalgan criticized the attacks on civilians in an emotional speech, saying he couldn't believe that the violence that the leader has been inflicting on his people. Meanwhile, the UN's chief, Ban Ki-moon, has also come out to urge the UN to act right away, giving harrowing details of the violence.
Estimates indicate that more than 1,000 people have been killed. The eastern part of the country is reported to be under the control of opposition elements who have taken over arms and ammunition from weapon depot. There are daily clashes in at least 3 cities near Tripoli. The streets of the capital are largely deserted. People cannot leave their houses for fear of being shot by government forces or militias. Colonel Gaddafi's supporters are reportedly conducting house-by-house searches and arrests. According to some reports, they have even gone into hospitals to kill wounded opponents.
Well, Scott Heidler is at the UN for us following the events at the headquarters.
After a briefing by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon of just how dire the situation is in Libya, the Security Council also heard an emotional plea from the Libyan ambassador to the United Nations. That is when there was a draft resolution floated to be reviewed by the members. It was drafted by the United Kingdom and France, and in that resolution it calls for a referral to the International Criminal Court for possible crimes against humanity. There's an arms embargo and a travel ban for Gaddafi's inner circle. Now, this resolution, a draft resolution, is going to be looked at again by a special session Saturday by the Security Council, and all indications are right now that it's expected to pass. Now, it has broad appeal, and that's not just from Western nations. There has been a unified voice of the international community that something needs to be done in Libya, and it appears as though Saturday is possibly when the Security Council will actually do something.
Now, the US President Barack Obama has already signed off on sanctions against the Libyan government. Washington is planning to freeze the assets held in the US by Gaddafi and his 4 children. And all US banks have been put on notice to watch out for any sudden movements of funds from Libya. US military assistance will now be cut off also. The measures coming just shortly after the US confirmed that it has managed to get all its people out of the country. Now, Anas El-Gomati is a Libyan political analyst and blogger and joins me now live from Paris. Anas, thank you for being with us. Just a quick overview from you, if you would. We've got Gaddafi and his son pledging to continue the fight. We have what appears to be fairly good evidence that most of the country has fallen out of his control. Where do we stand, in your opinion?
Well, as the days go by, we've only become stronger. I mean, I can look at the beginning of the conflict, and you know, public opinion was firmly divided between Libyans themselves. Some were just saying that we've come out of sanctions and that we're undergoing a period of development. But now, as it stands, those that were with Gaddafi have now started to come with the people, and that's purely because he shot himself in the foot. He effectively killed himself in the way that he knew family from day one.
But he doesn't see it that way, and he's making a fight of it quite literally in the bloodiest sense. And he seems to have the majority of the weaponry.
When has he ever seen anything? When has he ever seen anything in a clear light? I mean, I feel that, you know, having just listened to the United Nations say that we have to do something about Gaddafi, but we've had to do something about him for 42 years. I mean,
sure,
he's
but
not,
I mean,
he's not someone that's just appeared in the international scene.
My question being, in the face of the apparent determination by Gaddafi to use the weapons at his disposal against the protesters, how much strength have the protesters really got to stand up to military action?
Well, yeah, well, I mean, Tripoli clearly needs its brothers and sisters in the east of Libya and in key cities like Misrata to try and help them. I mean, they're the ones that are armed. We have to admit and we have to look at the situation in a sober light. The people in Tripoli are unarmed.
We've just been speaking
as clear as it can get if they're unarmed.
We've just been speaking to our correspondent in Baida, where things apparently have become much calmer, and really it appears that the control is firmly in the hands of the protesters. But is there a sense that this may lead to the east of the country thinking about going it alone?
I've never had that impression. I mean, if you listen to the protests, the east of Libya are all calling for their brothers in Tripoli. We have to maintain, and I mean, the voices on the ground are all saying that Libya is united. This has always been the policy of the government, to try and divide between city, between tribe, between region. But it won't work. I mean, if you look at the responses from Gaddafi and from Saif al-Islam as well, they've both come to the same conclusion that we'll reach civil war and so. But Libya is united. So those are, you know, our brothers in Benghazi are the ones that want to keep us together.
So if we do see a united Libya staying as one in a post-Gaddafi environment, if and when that arrives, what will that united Libya look like in terms of government? Who will be leading it? What kind of government will it have?
Well, I mean, speculation could be rife between anybody that could lead. An obvious focus will draw upon tribal leaders and and people of influence from religious backgrounds as well. I have to say that essentially people have realised that totalitarianism and dictatorships don't work. And in that sense, imposing authority and rule upon people without their will has never failed to galvanise public opinion against them. I mean, we can only understand that we're learning from our problems and we're learning from our mistakes now, and that those that are going to come, into the spotlight in the coming days and the coming weeks, they have realised that never again, we can never go back to what we've had with Gaddafi. And I propose that obviously those that are looking at the situation in a political light have to think about the best scenario for the country, which is that nobody can come out and say and claim that they have authority or land there. I mean, that's as basic as it can get. I mean, people have come out from all over the world that have their own histories and have reinvented themselves. If you look at East Germany and if you look at the the Iron Curtain that went right across Europe, those countries in the East were never thought to be civilized, in the modern light. And Libya is now, breaking out of 42 years of silence.
Okay.
I'm sure that those days of silence, whilst they're over, there'll be years of prosperity for us ahead.
Anas Al-Ghamati in Paris, thank you for talking to us. Now, many foreign nationals continue to be evacuated from Libya. A British naval ship, the HMS Cumberland, sailed from the eastern city of Benghazi to Malta on Saturday, carrying 207 evacuees, and a second warship is now being sent to Libya to help with rescue missions. Meanwhile, 300 Americans also arrived in Malta on Saturday. Strong winds and high seas actually delayed the ferry from leaving Tripoli for 3 days with those people. And a US charter flight has also arrived in Istanbul in Turkey, carrying some refugees. Some of the evacuees had been working for the US embassy in Tripoli. Now, Romania has sent 2 military planes to Libya to pick up almost 100 of its citizens. Those who have made it back have said they are horrified by what they saw in Libya. With me in the studio is Tarek Youssef, a senior research fellow at the Dubai School of Government. Thank you for staying with us. It is so very opaque, this whole situation. We were just talking to Anas Al-Ghamati, as you heard, about who seems to hold the balance of power in this. And while the protesters do seem to have some sort of geographical situation under control, Gaddafi still has the weapons and he still seems to have the desire, doesn't he?
If we take his word,